Hello, tubers and tubettes. My name is David. I live up in Northern California, and if you haven't met me before, thanks for finding me, and I hope you come back. So today I'm talking about stories about where I grew up and how it was when I grew up. You know, a lot of people, they don't realize it now, but there was a whole different era. I mean, really, a lot of things were different, you know, back in the day. I remember my childhood almost kind of reminded me of Napoleon Dynamite, you know, where there was a point in that movie where he had to go to somebody's house to find his date or something, and they got all the way over there. He had to ride in a lowrider to get over there, and they got all the way over there, and the person he was looking for was not there because we didn't have cell phones back then. And I remember doing that myself, going over to my friend's house, which is about 2 miles away. I would just walk over there, and then my friend's mom, Scott, would say, "Oh, Scott's not here. He's walked over to your house." It was just very, very inefficient, you know, not having phones and everything. And another thing I remember is that old people, they used to get in your business all the time. I mean, I remember going into restaurants and stuff, and they would tell me things that it wasn't even their business. I mean, you would never do it nowadays, you know, because somebody would say something to you. But, you know, things from, you know, you need to straighten up, or we don't serve people in here with long hair. I remember that happening. You can't be barefooted walking into this, you know, this crappy restaurant. We had a restaurant there called the Sidewinder Cafe, and it was pretty bad, you know, in terms of the way it looked. And I remember years later, Whoopi Goldberg was in a movie, and it was filmed out there. I remember part of it, but she was in like a big kettle, and I can't remember what the thing was about, but it was a very bizarre movie, and that was a big deal to have her go out to where I grew up. Another person that lived out there was, I think his name was Dick Keel. He was Lurch, and like a really, really tall guy. I want to say like 8 foot something, and he lived out there. We could always tell, you know, when he came into town, because he would ride in a big limousine, mostly because of his legs. He had a lot of back problems, and he needed to really be able to stretch out in comfort. We also had another guy named Frank Myers, and he was the guy that did the Andy Griffith Show. He was the director. He lived out there with his wife. I know they ended up getting a divorce, and he just really liked, you know, the whole desert scene. We had another place out there. It's called, it's like looks like a spacecraft on top of an extinct volcano, and that we had been told was owned by the guy who owned Wrigley Spearmint Gum. So that was there's like a house on the bottom of it, like a hotel at the bottom, but on the top it was a really space age design with windows all the way around it, capped on top of a volcano. And then I remember years later, I found out that this commentator, his name was Hugh Hauser. He would have shows about different places in California, kind of like going from place to place. I was told that he owned it. And then, of course, when he died, you know, it kind of went back into disrepair. I have no idea if it's still there or not. But I remember as I was growing up, like one place I remember was a mine. It was a mining town, kind of out of up the mountain. And it was a silver mine, and it was called the Silver Bell Mine. And when I was a kid, I remember going there with my father, and then later with my friends, and we it looked as if the town ran dry, or they just stopped paying the workers and they just left. The houses were there was clothes in the house, there was cars left in the driveway. It looked like they just totally left, you know, like that was the last paycheck and we're out of here. And And I remember there being a lot of old, really cool cars there, like Hudsons and stuff. But of course, back then I didn't have the foresight to think about, oh, maybe I should pick that up, bring it to my house. I never, ever, ever thought about that. And there were numerous times that I remember old cars, that had been abandoned, and I never even thought about taking them because they weren't mine. But the Silver Bell mine was pretty interesting because everybody had left like quickly. And so then as kids, we would get flashlights and we would go into the mine, which is probably about a mile into the mountain. And we'd go in there, 3 of us, and actually 4 of us. And it was kind of like the guys on some of these movies with the kids, like on the Lean on Me type of movie. And that's how we were. We're always, searching and looking at different places and doing different things. I remember one time we found an abandoned house, and they did have a pond there, but probably the guy that owned it died. And so the pond was pretty big, but it had almost completely dried up. And by the time we got there as kids, I remember that there were some big catfish in that pond. And they were, where it was like an acre pond, now it was like down to like maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. And they were literally living in the mud. There wasn't any water anymore. They were like hours away from dying. So I went back home and told my dad, and we had a lake at the time called Leisure Lake, and we were 1/10 owner of it, and we lived there. My dad was a caretaker. This is after he got out of the Marine Corps. And so we went and in our truck, I think we had a 1950 Ford flatbed, took a 55-gallon drum with water in it and a bunch of 5-gallon buckets. And back in the day, they didn't have any of these buckets made out of plastic. They were all metal buckets. So we went down there as kids. We knew how to handle catfish. They have a spike on the top and 2 out the side. But me and my friends and my dad, there's probably a couple more adults, we went down there and got all those catfish that were still alive, and we put them into this 55-gallon drum, and then we saved them. We took them back to our lake and we let them go, and I mean, they were happy as a fish could be, to be in real water. And where we lived, it was a 7-acre lake, so pretty big. I remember when we were transitioning from living in the LA area, near Disneyland, actually, by Catella Lane, right across the freeway from Disneyland. I remember there were a bunch of frogs in our area. We were next to a driving range, and we would see all kinds of frogs over there, and even in our yard. So I remember we had gone and started collecting frogs to take them up to the lake, and we were like, this is going to be great because the frogs are going to be all around the lake and they're going to have a better life. They're only like maybe 1 inch long. They were just babies. And so we went and we picked up like probably 2 half-gallon metal buckets full of frogs. And they were literally stacked on top of each other. As kids, we never thought, well, maybe they could suffocate. And I don't think too many of them suffocated, but we put them inside there, and then we transported them up to this lake that my dad was part owner in, to let them go in the lake. And so I remember we took them around to a certain side of the lake. We thought, well, this would be really good. This is a perfect place to let them go. And we let all these frogs go, really kind of in the water, not on the side. So some of the frogs went left and some of the frogs went right. But a majority of the frogs went straight out to the lake. And as they were going out to the lake, and they're probably 100 feet out there, we started seeing the catfish coming up and eating them like crazy. So we had transported them all the way out there just so that the catfish could eat them. I mean, a bunch of them did get saved. They went to the left and right, but basically the majority of what we had, they went straight out, and catfish ate them. And then, of course, we had a bunch of dead ones in the bucket. We just threw those out there, and they ate those too. So the catfish had a good time eating them. So some of the memories, I have of growing up in this kind of campground that we ended up doing. We were all campers. We belonged to a group called the High Cruisers, and the group decided to maybe buy a campground. So I want to say it's probably 27 acres with a 7-acre lake on it. I remember them building a bathroom there. We had a mobile home there, and there were other mobile homes there too. But I just remember our mobile home was parked there, and we got to stay there for free. And being the caretaker, that's how my dad was able to get 1/10 of this campground. Later, I don't really know what happened. I never asked my dad about it, but the whole thing just kind of collapsed at some point. And I know my dad was itching to get his own place, so we actually found another place in the same town, but way away from where we were. We were like in a wind zone. I remember there's a lot of wind and big sand dunes and stuff. And someday I want to go back over there, maybe with one of my sons, and I want to take some videos of that place so you guys can be able to see it. But I remember my dad found another 5 acres. Four of the acres were fenced in, and one of the acres was on the outside of the fence. And I remember the guy that owned it before us, they had so much junk. It was like he was a massive hoarder. I remember there was a pile of wood, like cut wood that he was using for firewood. But I mean, this thing had to be, of course this is in the memory of a child, but it seemed to me like it was like 10 or 12 feet tall and maybe 50 feet by 50 feet. So it was massive. And he had a bunch of old cars and junk and trailer and all this crap. And I remember them telling my dad, well, we still have to clean all this stuff out, because I mean it was packed in there. And the price of the property was going to be $7,500, once it was all cleaned out and all this stuff hauled off. Or you could buy it for $5,000 and clean it up yourself. And my dad just thought he won the lottery, because he's like, get rid of all this stuff. He goes, this is all really, really good stuff. And so we basically ended up moving into a dump. We did end up burning a lot of that wood, because there was a lot of firewood there. And when my mom and dad finally got a divorce, it was so much money to haul all this stuff out. I remember we had a guy with a big earth mover, and he came and dug a big trench. I'm going to say like maybe 10 foot deep, maybe 10 foot wide, maybe 45 feet long. And then they just pushed all that junk into that hole. And it's still there today. I don't think anybody knows except for me. My sister knew, but she's passed away. But I don't think a lot of people remember. My mom and my dad are both passed away. But there's a bunch of crap underneath the desert there, and I don't think anybody would have ever known to look. So that's just some of my memories of where I grew up. And I'll probably remember some more and make another video on it. But thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed some of my teenage years and the Worm Ranch. And thank you very much for listening. And I look forward to seeing you again. Have a great day.